So here we are again. Just as a reminder, we're playing around with Regtest, and I just looked at the address groupings associated with the built-in wallet for the bitcoin-cli client. And since we last spoke, I've just run one command, which is to get a new address, and then I ran list address groupings again to see if it would show up, and it didn't. So I'm gonna create a new transaction, and I'm going to pay some money from this address to that address. And the fact that they're both in the same HD wallet should make no difference, because the whole idea of an HD wallet is you can't tell without knowing the master secret whether two addresses are associated or not. Alright, so the command that I am going to use is send to address. So let's do bitcoin-cli regtest send to address, and the address we want is this one, and it needs to go in quotes. I haven't tried it without the quotes. It might work without the quotes. And how much should we send? Let's send 13 point blah 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 bitcoins. Invalid amount, preposterous. Okay, alright, and what gets returned is a transaction ID. So let's do bitcoin-cli get raw transaction, and it has to be in regtest. And there should be a way to go right to a decoded transaction, don't you think it's a little bit of a pain to do this every time. So now we have to decode the raw transaction. And okay, so here we have the payment from our old address. You can't see the old address, but you do get a reference to the transaction in which the input was paid. By the way, this is the if we wanted to see which transaction allocated 50 bitcoins to this address, it would be it's the first, isn't it? It's like I think it's the very first block that pays to that address, because that was our first Coinbase reward to mature. So this says, does this say what block? Here we look. Yeah, okay, so it doesn't seem like there's a reference to which block it is. It's an interestingly lock time is not 0. Oh, you know why? That's because it's a Coinbase reward. So that's how they enforce that requirement about Coinbase rewards not being spendable for 100 blocks. That's because this one was locked when it was created. Is that right? And then they're not using this. And anyway, strange. So maybe I don't know exactly what I'm talking about, but don't you think it has to be related? I'm just kind of fumbling through this stuff as I go along. So this is where the amount comes from, and the amount is implicit. If we want to know what it is, we have to go look up this transaction. And here's the output, and here's the here's the payment, and then here's the change. The change is the 0th one, and the payment is the first one. And we have this locking script on the funds. And okay, so maybe a fun thing to do, I want to manually create a transaction that spends this. So I'm going to get the private key associated with this thing, and I'm going to try to manually satisfy the locking script just by trying to create the transaction that does it. And I have some idea of how to get started, because there is a command here called create raw transaction, and sign raw transaction and send raw transaction. Plus there's some dude on the internet who's actually done it, so I'm going to use that as a template, and I'm going to try to spend this, but with a transaction that I don't use a wallet to create. I'm going to sort of create it myself. And I'll pause the video until I can figure that out. So I'm working on creating my transaction, and I've got some information together here. This is about the input, and here's the address, and this is the private key. And for a destination address, I thought it would be fun to use something unrelated to the bitcoin-cli wallet. So I'm going to go into my code folder, and there's a Python function in here, key to address ECC example, and I'm going to use that to generate a new private key. Okay, and I'll just take all of this information and dump it into this little file I'm creating to keep track of everything that's happening. All right, and I'm going to try to make a payment to this address. Now I'm going to start imitating the work of the master here. So I googled bitcoin-cli sign raw transaction, and this comes up, and someone has asked how to create and sign a raw transaction with bitcoin-cli when the key is unrelated to the wallet key. So I don't need that. I could use the wallet key, but I don't want to rely on that. So I'm going to follow this person's example. So now for what it's worth, I'm going to look at the documentation for create public key. Sorry, my server is being kind of slow. And so under transactions, I believe, raw transactions, you can see that there's a command, create raw transaction. So let's see what the help file says about that. I think that my computer is going slow because I'm resyncing the ordinary Bitcoin daemon while I'm playing with Regtest. So we'll do help, create raw transaction, and I wish that would tab complete. And okay, so first you have a collection of inputs, and you need transaction ID, the vout, and those are the only two fields that are required. So I've already collected that information for the input that I want to use. We know that the UTXO that I want to spend is in this transaction, and we know that its vout index is 1, and these other things too. So let's go back. All right, so I need the inputs, and let's compare that to what, no, is it too soon for that? Yeah, let's compare that to what this person has done. So he's creating a raw transaction, and it seems like, and he's got quotes, and then he's got a hard bracket, and in curly brackets, these must be, yeah, okay, sorry. So in the curly brackets, this is he's describing the UTXO that he wants to spend. So he says which transaction it's in, and he gives the vout index. So we can create that part for ourselves now. Maybe I should just start editing this thing in my other little editor. So I'm just using this file for scratch work. So paste that in, and we don't need that stuff. We might want to use Regtest instead. And we have a Bitcoin client, full path. Create raw transaction. Now we don't want to use that transaction ID. We want to use our transaction ID, which is that one. And our vout is not 0, it is 1. So I will change that. And now I guess I could save this, but I don't want to show the contents of my personal computer on the internet, so I will not do it at this time. And okay, so what is this? It seems like this must be the address that he wants to make the payment to, and this is the amount. I'm just guessing. Let's go back to the documentation and try to figure that out. So the outputs are required, and you need an address. So these probably are in another set of, okay, so they're completely separate. So in the first set of quotes comes just the inputs, and it seems like in the next set of quotes comes the outputs, and it looks like they have a lot of problems here with nested quotes. It's really could be better description of what's going on here. And so here are the outputs, the data. Now this data thing, what is that? I don't believe he has any data in his example. Yeah, so he just has a destination address and a value and no data. See what's going on here. So it seems like, what else did he do? So it produced a raw transaction, and now he's decoding the raw transaction, and so enough stuff has been defined here to get a transaction ID for this thing, and there are the I guess it's filling out everything with default values. I guess the default version is 1, the default log time is 0, and again I'm just making this stuff up off the top of my head. And the sequence number is by default FFFFFFFFFF. And so it's filled in the value, and it's extracted as public key hash from the address that he provided, and this is just a standard pub key hash payment. And it's automatically filled in the hex version of the locking script. So seems pretty good, and now the next thing to do is to sign the transaction. So are we kind of ready to go with our thing? Let's see what we can fill in. So we're building it here, and I decided that this is the address that I want to make my payment to. So I'm going to put this here, and we have a lot of money because we're just using, pretend money on Regnet. So I'll pay myself 5 Bitcoin, 5.0 Bitcoin. So that should work to create an unsigned transaction. Let's see. So we'll copy and run the command here. Let's see what happens. And I'm not sure what's wrong. It's an error with the parsing of the JSON. Frustrating. I'm going to pause the video until I can figure that out. Okay, I think I solved one problem just to notice the existence of another problem. So let me just spin this down a little bit to make your screen refresh in case the video is doing weird things. What was it we were trying to do? I believe it was this, right? I think it's just that I put a comma there. But now we have a new problem, which is this is a mainnet Bitcoin address, but we need a Regtest Bitcoin address, so I'm going to try to fix that. Okay, I'm going to go for this manually. So I found a site here that gives all of the address prefixes, and we are using testnet public key, so that means that the version number has to be 6F. So let's figure out how to do that. So let's go back here. I'm using now BX, and BX Bitcoin 160. I applied that to the public key. That just this is the raw uncompressed public key. And what came out is this, and So now that's ready to be base 58 check encoded, and from there I should be able to control the version number. So let's look at bx help and see about base 58 check encoding, which is there somewhere. So let's do a help there. So bx base 58 check encode, and I want some help with that. Alright, and it says you can do -v for the version number, and the version number that we want is 6f. So hopefully this will work. Let's redo this, and now I want to do bx base 58 check encode -v 6f, whoops, 6f, and maybe it has to be in quotes. Maybe it has to be in hexadecimal notation. Alright, that worked. Now what if it's 6f? This is frustrating. Okay, I'm going to pause the video again. Okay, now I have a theory, which is that this must be in decimal instead of hexadecimal, so I'll try 111, and that worked. Alright, so now we have a testnet version of this Bitcoin address, and I will paste it here. So uncompressed testnet version, blah, and let's come back to our main project here. And if we can get back to this, the problem was that that's an invalid Bitcoin address, but now we have a valid one. Alright, cool, we're making progress. Now we'll do bitcoin-cli, regtest, decode raw transaction of this. Boop. Alright, so it's looking good. Notice that my my input is unsigned, so it's not yet unlocked. And also there's no change address, which is bad. Because if I just if I were to fill in the rest here, I would you remember that there's like 13 point something Bitcoin in this output, and if I pay 5 of it to this address, the remaining 7 Bitcoins will go to the miner, which in reality would be like a $100,000 mistake. So we have to figure out some way to add another address. So I can probably just add a change address. Actually, I need to look into that. I'm going to, should I stop the video now? This video is getting pretty long, so I'm going to stop this and maybe take things up in the next video.